Hi, welcome back to my book club. If you're new here, hi, my name is Hunter. I'm a therapist, and together we're reading Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents by Lindsay Gibson. And today we're reading Chapter 8, How to Avoid Getting Hooked by an Emotionally Immature Parent. If this is the first video you're watching, go to my YouTube channel. There's a playlist titled Book Club where we have all the other chapters. And for today's chapter, let me know what you think in the comments down below. Let's get started. It's hard to see our parents as valuable human beings. As children, we believe our parents can do anything. Most of us are instilled with beliefs such as these. I highlighted three. A parent will always be there for you. You can always tell your parents anything. Your parents will love you no matter what. But if your parents were emotionally immature, many of these statements may not be true. In this chapter, Gibson will help you look beneath the surface of your childhood hopes to see your parents more accurately. You'll be learning a new way to relate to them so that you won't expect what they can't give. You'll learn how to protect your emotions by approaching your parents in a more neutral way. The fantasy that a parent will change. A common fantasy among children of emotionally immature parents is that their parents will have a change of heart. Unfortunately, self-preoccupied parents refuse all invitations to fulfill their part in their child's healing story. Focused on their own healing fantasy, they expect their children to make up for their childhood hurts. We'll see this in Annie's story. Annie's mother, Betty, a woman with strong religious convictions, had always been emotionally insensitive. Annie reached the breaking point when Betty made a derogatory comment about her in front of her colleagues at work. Annie's feelings were deeply hurt, and over the next few days, Annie kept trying to get Betty to understand how hurt she was. But Betty didn't offer any response. Emptiness hung between them, along with Annie's impression that her mother couldn't care less. In addition to being wounded, Annie was confused. Although Betty refused to respond, Annie knew her mother was sociable and capable of showing kindness and generosity toward other people. Annie was grieving over not having an emotionally supportive mother, and working through that would take time. She was doing everything she knew to repair the relationship. But emotional closeness demanded a level of emotional maturity her mother simply didn't have. Her mother's silence made Annie feel like an emotional hostage. Gibson told Annie that she needed to find a way forward that didn't involve her mother's participation. Annie was so intent on winning her mother's approval that she'd stopped evaluating the relationship. She'd never asked herself whether Betty was the type of person she enjoyed being around. This will be continued later in the chapter, but for now, the next part, forging a new relationship. The rest of this chapter explores how to handle an emotionally immature parent by changing your expectations and replacing reactivity with observation. Three key approaches that will help you: detached observation, maturity awareness, and stepping away from your old rolled self. First, detached observation. The first step in gaining your emotional freedom is to assess whether either of your parents was emotionally immature. As a reminder, enmeshment occurs when parents don't respect boundaries. I believe we saw that in an earlier chapter. In families dominated by emotionally immature people, enmeshment and playing roles are valued in order to keep the family close. No one's true self is ever acknowledged. Observation and emotional detachment can give individuals a place to stand outside of their family system. When people keep themselves poised in neutral observation, they can't be hurt or emotionally ensnared by other people's behavior. When interacting with emotionally immature people, you'll feel more centered if you operate from a calm thinking perspective rather than emotional reactivity. Something that Gibson doesn't say in here, but I think needs to be said, is that a lot of this is easier said than done. Like how she says next, your job is to stay detached emotionally and observe how others behave, just like a scientist would. It's very easy to say that, and I'm sure it is much harder to do that when you're interacting with your parent. If you're practicing observing your parent or other loved ones and find yourself getting emotional, your distress is a sign that your healing fantasy has been activated. If you start slipping into your fantasy, you'll feel weak, vulnerable, apprehensive, and needy. If you find yourself becoming reactive, Gibson has some advice. Silently repeat to yourself, detach, detach, detach. If the other person is still getting to you, find an excuse to put some distance between you. As you can see, staying observational isn't passive, it's a very active process. As you practice observing, you'll become stronger and more confident in your ability to see what's really going on. One last note on observation. Observing allows you to stay in a state of relatedness with your parents without getting caught up in their emotional tactics. Relatedness is different from relationship. In relatedness, there's communication, but no goal of having a satisfying emotional exchange. In contrast, engaging in a real relationship means being open and establishing emotional reciprocity. If you try this with emotionally immature people, you'll feel frustrated and invalidated. It makes more sense to save your relationship aspirations for people who can give something back. The second tool, the maturity awareness approach. This approach will grant you emotional freedom from painful relationships by taking the emotional maturity of others into account. Once you peg a person's maturity level, their responses will make more sense and be more predictable. There are 3 ways to relate to the person without getting yourself upset. Number 1, expressing and then letting go. 2, focusing on the outcome, not the relationship. And 3, managing, not engaging. Let's go through them. I wanted to share this whole passage because I thought it was really good. Expressing and then letting go. Tell the other person what you want to say in as calm and non-judgmental way as you can, and don't try to control the outcome. Explicitly say what you feel or want and enjoy the act of self-expression, but release any need for the other person to hear you or change. You can't force others to empathize or understand. The point is to feel good about yourself for engaging in what I call clear, intimate communication. Others may or may not respond how you want them to, but that doesn't matter. What matters is that you expressed your true feelings in a calm, clear way. That goal is achievable and within your control. Focusing on the outcome, not the relationship. First, identify the specific outcome you want from each interaction and set it as a goal. Here are some examples that Gibson gives. I express myself to my mother even though I'm nervous. I tell my parents I'm not coming home for Christmas. I ask my father to talk nicely to my children. Gibson wants to be crystal clear. Focus on the outcome, not the relationship. As soon as you focus on the relationship and try to improve it or change it at an emotional level, an interaction with an emotionally immature person will deteriorate. Managing, not engaging. Instead of emotionally engaging with immature people, set a goal of managing the interaction, including duration and topics. Gently ease past attempts to change the topic or bait you emotionally. Be polite, but be prepared to address the issue as many times as it takes to get a clear answer. Their attempts at diversion and avoidance ultimately break down if you keep asking the same question. As a reminder, also manage your own emotions by observing and narrating your feelings to yourself rather than being reactive. Some common concerns with the maturity awareness approach. There were 3 that I wanted to highlight. One concern. It's all very nice to advocate not being emotional around your parents, but you haven't even seen how intense and manipulative my parents can be. I get overwhelmed by the intensity of their reactions. Gibson's response is, we can all get overwhelmed by another person's emotion. That's known as emotional contagion. But you'll feel more secure if you set an intention of observing what's happening rather than becoming swept up in it. Even a bit of observation will help lift you out of the pressure to feel others' distress. It's their distress, not yours. You might feel some of it, but you don't have to become as distressed as they are. The second concern. My parents have been very good to me. They paid for my education and loaned me money. I would feel disrespectful if I saw them as emotionally immature. It doesn't seem right to think about them this way. Gibson says, There's nothing right or wrong about thoughts. You aren't being disrespectful by being truthful with yourself about your parents' emotional limitations. To be an emotionally mature adult, you must be free to observe and assess others in the privacy of your own mind. It isn't disloyal to have your own opinion. You can respect your parents for everything they've given you, but you don't have to pretend they have no human frailties. As we discussed in Chapter 2, satisfying a child's physical and financial needs is not the same as meeting that child's emotional needs. For instance, if you needed someone to listen, to provide essential emotional connection, receiving money or a good education might distract you from that need, but it wouldn't fill it. The third concern I wanted to highlight. I can learn and practice these skills while I'm sitting calmly by myself, but it all goes out the window when my parents start criticizing me. I feel as nervous as a place kicker in the Super Bowl. How can I be calm enough to observe or manage them? Gibson responds, the Super Bowl place kicker may be nervous, but you can be sure he's working to be as calm as he can. A big part of sports psychology is learning how to relax when under stress. Your goal is to practice being a little less nervous than usual by focusing on the outcome you want. This isn't the Super Bowl. There's no pressure because you are no longer struggling to gain anything. You don't need the negativity your parents dish up. It isn't about winning or losing. It's about freeing yourself from reacting to your parents' emotional contagion. This is the part where we continue Annie's story. After months of enduring her mother Betty's stubborn silent treatment, Annie tried the maturity awareness approach. She invited her parents to join her at one of her kids' soccer games. Her desired outcome was a visit with no drama, simply reestablishing contact with her parents. Her parents came late as usual, and Betty looked upset and emotional, making herself the center of their interaction. But Annie reported, I didn't acknowledge it or feed it. As they were leaving the game, Betty choked up but still didn't talk to Annie. Annie was mentally prepared, and rather than feeling irritated, she simply observed how Betty avoided genuine communication and instead acted like she was the injured party. Another example from Annie. On Betty's birthday, Annie called and left a couple messages. When Annie finally reached Betty on the phone a few days later, her mother answered tersely in a cold, reserved tone. Annie played it straight and said, I'm surprised I didn't hear for you. Did you get my messages? When Betty answered coolly in the affirmative, not thanking her and not showing any warmth, Annie decided to end the conversation. After that conversation, Amy felt more emotionally free. She was no longer obsessed with her mother's rejection, saying, I no longer feel that I've done anything wrong. It's sad that this important relationship won't have a good resolution, but the fact that my mother doesn't respond doesn't put a judgment on me. The final tool, stepping out of an old role self. The ability to step back and observe your own role self is where the emotional freedom begins. When you see how you've gotten stuck in a role self, you can decide to do it differently. Like with Rochelle. Rochelle's mother was a very demanding woman who expected Rochelle to be at her beck and call. When Rochelle decided to observe her mother's emotional immaturity instead of being automatically hurt by it, she felt a profound change. For the first time, I saw her behavior for what it was. I no longer feel compelled to jump in immediately and be the good daughter for her. I don't have to take on her problems. The ultimate goal in any interaction with a parent or an emotionally immature person is to keep a grip on your own mind and feelings. Keeping your mind on your specific desired outcome for the interaction will help you retain an objective, observing stance no matter how they behave. Gibson makes a good point here about being cautious about new openness. According to Bowen, 1978, as a child becomes more of an individual, the emotional, immature parent's knee-jerk reaction is to do something that attempts to force the child back into an enmeshed pattern. Gibson advises caution if your parents show an uncharacteristic openness in response to your adoption of an observational and goal-directed approach. If they start treating you with more respect or open up a bit, you could be vulnerable to getting sucked back into your old healing fantasy. Be careful. If you allow yourself to slip back into those old childhood hopes, your parents' increased openness is likely to evaporate. In the end, the overall dynamic remains the same. Your parents will be emotionally available to you in an inverse proportion to how much you feel the need for them. Only if you operate from your adult, objective mind will you feel safe to your parents. In your interactions, just keep observing the present moment. We've made it to the summary. I wanted to read all of the summary because I think it's really helpful. Our early dependence on our parents makes us seek their love and attention. However, we must step away from our childhood roles if we don't want to repeat them in our adult relationships. The maturity awareness approach will help you deal with an emotionally immature parent or any difficult self-involved person more effectively. You'll have better results if you try to relate to your parent in a neutral way rather than trying to have a relationship. First, you need to assess your parents' level of maturity and approach interactions between the two of you from an observational perspective, focusing on thinking rather than reacting emotionally. Then you can employ the 3 steps involved in the maturity awareness approach: expressing yourself and then letting it go, focusing on the outcome rather than the relationship, and managing the interaction rather than engaging emotionally. That being said, what I took from this chapter was this: as much as it may hurt to detach, the current relationship is already causing hurt. Change is possible, even if you have to go through a bumpy road before it smooths out. In the next chapter, we'll explore the road to freedom from old parent-child patterns. As you read on, you'll see how good it feels to finally step out of old patterns of relating that have been running your life. Thank you so much for reading this chapter with me. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and make sure to like and subscribe for our next video, where we'll be reading Chapter 9, How It Feels to Live Free of Roles and Fantasies. I'll see you next week.